How's it going out there? Now, today is not good news, obviously. There's been a revelation on one of these tragic incidences that have been happening around the country, and one that has the fandom talking, the furry fandom particularly, and that is the one in Indianapolis. There was, as far as like these kind of news stories, I usually don't cover them on this channel, mostly because it's human news, right? It has no correlation with the fandom, and while I'm a person who doesn't believe that fandom is entirely for escapism, you don't draw attention to news stories that don't necessarily involve the fandom on a furry news channel. So I typically, while I do read the news and I do read nonfiction, things like that, I typically don't bring those kind of topics into the discussion because there's no ties or correlation. But unfortunately, there is and one of these incidences that happened in the past few weeks, there is now a correlation. Not with the furry fandom, in essence, and I do furry news here, but more with the Brony fandom. For those of you who don't know what the Brony fandom is, there was a My Little Pony Friendship is Magic show that showed up in the mid-2010s. It was a very well-recognized show. It was directed with Lauren Faust, the person of Dexter, was it Dexter's? I think Powerpuff Girls is for certain. She's a well-known cartoonist. So she did this sort of flash animation, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Most furries don't need any introduction on that. Though My Little Pony has been a Hasbro property for many, many decades. Even in my childhood, they sold plastic pony toys and et cetera, et cetera. Back when they would try to do product tie-ins with the cartoons. And that's where they would make most of their money, merchandise and stuff. So, that being said, it was found that in a recent article by the New York Post here, it was found that there was a connection between the individual who had taken lives in Indianapolis and the show My Little Pony. Apparently, the guy was a fan of it. Now, the interesting thing about obviously there was the issue of response on this tweet, and a lot of people were defensive, like there's no correlation with it, and blah, 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 blah. Now, it's easy to get on the defensive in situations like this when you see a headline like this. It's easy to get on the defensive and go, oh, no, My Little Pony's not all about that. It's not all about that. It's like, it's almost ironic in a sense where you have a sort of secular show where you have a fandom of people trying to defend their fandom from, the heinous act that individual did, when it's neither here nor there. His fanship of My Little Pony did not correlate directly with his actions on that, or at least there's no evidence of that correlation. However, many people will say that the Brony fandom has had issues with right-wing extremism. And it was noted in the article a few times, and ironically, some of the comments and the thing are like, what about his ties with right-wing extremists? And they kind of brought that up a few times. Though, they kind of brought in that My Little Pony groups have found themselves having trouble with dealing with radicalized ideas and radicalized forms of expression. What this kind of shows is that a lot of times when Americans think of radicalized ideals, they think of religion. Whether it's a radicalized, conservative or a radicalized or a radicalized Muslim, or there's a lot of people who have concepts of people who have become radicalized by a religion, not necessarily radicalized by, say, a cartoon or things like that. Though some people, might use it as a useful distraction. I think that's what most people are afraid of, is that, the people who ever radicalize this individual will use My Little Pony and go, see, it was the My Little Pony. It was, don't pay attention to the men behind the curtain who are drawing his emotions out and using them in nefarious ways. Like, pay attention to the cartoon, right? And the reality is that it's interesting that even with the concept of being a fan of content doesn't necessarily mean that you will follow the logic or the concepts of that content. For instance, one of the quotes of the perp here was noted as being, I hope I can be with Applejack in the afterlife, or something like that. It's one of those things. It's like, Applejack would just disown you, man. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, did you even watch the show that you allegedly are a fan of, right? Applejack has a serious work ethic, right? Applejack is a person who's like, hardworking, gets it done, simple means. Like, just get it done, get it done, get it done. And has a crazy work ethic, right? And yet the perp here, shot up a workplace, right? Applejack would be mortified. She'd be like, no, dude, you don't attack hardworking individuals, right? And some of the news stories kind of indicate that he was a former employee. So my suspicion is that he was let go from that job, right? That he, was found unfit, or did something wrong, or maybe was acting a bit strange, and they decided to part ways with that person, right? They decided to terminate his, employment, and maybe was a motivating factor. That's still being investigated. The issue here is that Applejack, as a matter of principle, would never ever want to see harm come to people who have good work ethic. And it's basically the Sikh community, who are the majority of people who work there seem to be Sikhs. They have a great work ethic, and they're great people. I've never heard anything of any group of people, they seem to have a good head on their shoulders. I've never heard of a radicalized Sikh, but then again, my worldview is not everywhere. I'm not omnipresent. There's probably, the thing is, these are great people. They worked hard, and they didn't deserve what happened to them and what this child did to them. And I call them a child. In essence, they're 19 years old, but I call them a child because they didn't put away the childish thing. And no, I'm not talking about My Little Pony. I'm talking about that they lost patience. They let hatred, stir their direction, right? They lost patience with themselves. They lost patience with others, right? This is how radicalization can happen when you're talking about content, right? Somebody can see the beauty in a religious text, or a beauty in a piece of content or art, and they compare it to the real world, right? And the real world can never live up to that perfectness, and they lose patience, and they give up on themselves, they give up on others, and they get radicalized. And that's the biggest thing that I think a lot of people need to be understanding of, is that radicalization can happen to anyone, to any group. It can happen within any group of individuals. Radicalization can happen anywhere. I've seen a lot of furries, in response to this incident go, well, at least we did it right. We did it right. Yes, furries are great. We did it right. And bronies, boo, they did it bad. Like this sort of group think. It's great to know it's not great in that sense that the thing is, like, even if it doesn't happen on our end, even if it happens on their group, it still impacted people, right? This guy being radicalized still harmed people, right? It's no cause for celebration. Like, for that, even this incident happened, no matter which group it came from, right? Whether if he came from a Christian group, a Muslim group, a Brony group, furry group, like, we have to be more aware as a species of radicalization and how radicalization occurs. And there are very good articles about that. I think Deo did one article about how radicalization, how people can use internet forums and things like that as a tool of radicalization. People cover these kind of things and how to educate people and making sure that they remain patient, remain kind, and try to de-escalate these kind of things. And one of the things about these situations is that being aware and doing your due diligence is important, but even then it might not be enough. There was articles from The Guardian about how the individual, the perp in this case, the mother had basically told the police about her son's problematic behavior, and the police did, follow up, and they took away a firearm of his. And apparently, when they took away that firearm of his, they never really followed up after that, or didn't really do more after that or keep up to tabs on it. And unfortunately, the perp got hold of different firearms, and then the incident happened. At least that's what I can glean on from the Guardian thing. So even if you do your due diligence, the bad thing can still happen. And I mean, it doesn't mean you don't try, right? You try everything you can. You try to make sure that you have good resources so that people can make more out of their lives, right? And I think that's something that furry community needs to and is really good at. Is it's good at sharing our creative, artistic sides. It's good at allowing people to have an open door as long as their heart is open, right? If they close their hearts off and want to blame other people for their problems and get frustrated about it, it gets more difficult to move them forward. It gets more difficult to do that, and people will cut ties if they think that a person is just being stubborn, right? And people will do that as an individual. The problem is that those individuals who have given up on themselves still exist, and they exist in our society, and they can, if they continue down a path of self-destruction, they can find themselves in this particular situation, or find themselves going down a irredeemable path. It's a difficult thing to deal with. It really requires mental professionalism and fortitude, but don't ever think it can't happen in any other group, in your group, right? It requires constant work, constant effort, and there's no solution. Now, obviously, you can say, well, there's solutions is get rid of access to firearms. That's a different thing, right? That's getting rid of some of the tools to help that ease these kind of situations is a whole other discussion. The concept of what causes a person to get to that point in the first place. Because here's the thing, a lot of people mention, as the tweet here originally mentioned, it's hey, who here is a Brony fan and hasn't gone crazy, right? And didn't and hasn't harmed anybody. Millions of people watched that show, right? Millions of people were fans of that show. A quarter of the fandom back in the heyday, which I joked and called them quarter horses, because the international furry research group, that's not their actual name, but basically they do a bunch of surveys, and they found that 25% of 25% of these furries, were fans of My Little Pony. But of course, they did that back during My Little Pony's heyday. It's probably tapered off a bit as My Little Pony's kind of ended. But, there's going to still be some around, just as there's Lion King fans still around. Just as there's, Rescuers fans still around. There are Rescuers fans? Are there the Rescuers fans? I don't know. I like the Rescuers. Because they had an Australian episode, of course. But the thing of the matter is that when it comes to these things, be on the lookout, obviously. But obviously, if you feel uncomfortable with an individual in your group and they talk about radical things, get information. Collect that information. Get ready to present that information. And, have that information on hand to, get things to the authorities. And even if the authorities, try to make sure that you're doing what you can, but don't kick yourself if a person goes beyond, basically goes down the path. There's only so much a person can do in these kind of situations, but be aware of these kind of situations. Be aware of them and know that it can happen in any group. One of the biggest things about furry that I think it's it can't happen to furry. We're GLBT. We're this. I think that how radicalization can kind of happen in the furry fandom is that we as furry fans, we as furries, there's this concept of anthropomorphism, right? We have animals, we have human characteristics, right? I'm a kangaroo dude, right? So we have these human characteristics in our animal characters. The interesting thing about it is that there is sort of the opposite direction, which is called zoomorphism, which is basically the animalization of a human, right? One of the big things is that for radicalized groups of individuals who want to try to go after particular groups of humans, a lot of propagandists will utilize the concept of sort of zoomorphism, right? They'll call, they'll say, well, these people are rats and these people are lizards, and they use that rhetoric not to humanize or to lift up animalistic characteristics, right? They don't use it to sort of lift the concept of an animal. They use it to lower or to dehumanize humans into what they deem as lesser creatures. And that sort of metaphor and that sort of rhetoric is the thing that you need to watch out for. If the person is dehumanizing other people and using animal slang and animal terminology to dehumanize other people, then you kind of know that they're probably moving down the road of radicalization. Whereas if they use animals in a positive metaphor and use it to lift up or things like that, then they're probably more in line with sort of the concept of the positive aspects of furry. Which is why I think that furry would never be is not immune to these kind of things. As I said, North Korean propaganda, right, the squirrel and the hedgehog, obviously uses animal metaphors, for their protagonists and antagonists, but their protagonists and antagonists are stand-ins for actual groups of humans, right? So just something to be aware of, and hopefully we never have to talk about something like this again. I know that the My Little Pony fandom has sort of been kind of dwindling over the years, but it is an important part to many people who are currently in the furry fandom. A lot of people who were in the Brony fandom ended up sort of entering into the furry fandom, or what they call immigrated into the furry fandom. And I think that we all know that the message of My Little Pony is a good one. But people, just because somebody enjoys content, doesn't necessarily mean that the message will be absorbed into them, right? Just because somebody has a Bible and has read it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to absorb the positive messages from it. They might take the negative aspects and might cling on to that. Same thing with My Little Pony. They might completely ignore the message entirely and just like the aesthetic, right? And something tells me that this individual didn't like, he's like, well, I'm a big fan of Applejack and I want Applejack to be with me. It's like, I don't think you liked Applejack as a person. If you harmed hardworking Americans who went to work, right, and went to work to put food on the table for their families and their loved ones, and you took away their ability to do that, they took away their ability to do that in peace, you took away the ability to provide for their families, then you didn't care for Applejack. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So, people with dual, they say one thing and they act a different way, right? They speak in one means and they behave in another. Just be aware of that kind of thing, and I think that in that case you'll do well for yourself. So, thank you very much for watching this somber episode. You can, if you like this kind of content, please go ahead and subscribe, and feel free to comment in the comment section below. And thank you very much for watching, and we will see you for the next episode, hopefully for a better topic. But I can't make any promises, obviously. Depends on what happens. It's all up to you. It's up to you. Make good news for me. Please. Please.